The rain hammered against the kitchen window like bullets against glass. Each drop was a tiny explosion that made my shoulders flinch. I'd been on my feet for 14 hours, and the ache had traveled from my heels up through my calves, settling deep in my lower back like an unwelcome guest that refused to leave. The restaurant's kitchen smelled of burnt garlic and desperation, a scent I'd grown intimately familiar with over the past 6 months. Table 12 needs their order now. Marco's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and impatient. I grabbed the heavy tray, my wrists protesting under the weight of perfectly plated dishes that cost more than my monthly rent. The Velvet Rose wasn't just any restaurant. It was where the city's elite came to see and be seen, where deals were made over wine that could pay off my student loans, where people like me were meant to be invisible. The dining room glowed with amber light from crystal chandeliers, casting long shadows that danced across white tablecloths. I moved through the space like a ghost, careful not to make eye contact, careful not to exist too loudly. That was the job. Serve the food, refill the wine, disappear. Table 12 sat in the corner booth, the most private section of the restaurant. I'd been warned about corner booths. They belonged to people who valued privacy for reasons that had nothing to do with romance that I approached with practiced deference, my eyes fixed on the tray in my hands. But even without looking directly, I felt him. The air shifted, grew denser, charged with something I couldn't name. It was the same feeling you get before a thunderstorm, when the atmosphere presses down on your chest and makes it hard to breathe. "Your appetizers, gentlemen," I murmured, beginning to set down the plates. That's when I made my first mistake. I looked up. He sat at the head of the table, surrounded by 4 men in expensive suits who looked like they could break bones without breaking a sweat. But he was different. Younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with dark hair swept back from a face that belonged in museums, all sharp angles and dangerous beauty. His suit was black, perfectly tailored, and probably cost more than my car. Actually more than 3 of my cars if I could afford 3. But it was his eyes that caught me. Dark, almost black, and completely still, like deep water that looked calm on the surface but hid dangerous currents underneath. I realized I'd been staring for 3 seconds too long. "I'm sorry," I stammered quickly, setting down the remaining plates. My hands trembled slightly, and I hated myself for it. One of the men at the table leaned forward, his voice low and threatening. "You got a problem? You staring at Luca?" The word was barely above a whisper, but it sliced through the tension like a blade. The dangerous man, Luca, immediately fell silent, settling back in his seat. The dark-eyed man hadn't moved, hadn't raised his voice, but everyone at the table had frozen, including me. "What's your name?" His voice was smooth, cultured, with the barest trace of an accent I couldn't place. Italian maybe, or somewhere in the Mediterranean. "Emma," I said, my throat tight. "Emma Walsh." He tilted his head slightly, studying me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "You're new here, Emma Walsh." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. 6 months. "And before that?" I hesitated. I was studying art history, but I trailed off, unsure why I was telling him anything. Something about his gaze made words spill out before I could stop them. "But money ran out." He finished for me, his lips curving into something that wasn't quite a smile.
"Of course it did."
"It always does." One of the other men shifted uncomfortably. Through the corner of my eye, I noticed 2 more men in dark suits standing near the restaurant's entrance. Their eyes constantly scanning the room. Not eating, not sitting, just watching. "I should let you enjoy your meal," I said, taking a step back. "Emma." My name in his mouth sounded different, weightier, like it meant something I didn't understand yet. "Do you know who I am?" I should have lied. Every instinct screamed at me to lie, to shake my head and play dumb. But something about those dark eyes made deception feel impossible. "No," I admitted. "Should I?" For the first time, something shifted in his expression. Not quite surprise, but close to it. The men around him exchanged glances that I couldn't interpret. He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking softly. "Most people do." "I'm not most people," I said, then immediately wanted to take it back. Who was I to talk to him like that? But the words were out, hanging in the charged air between us. The almost smile returned, wider this time. "No, I don't believe you are." Marco appeared at my elbow, his face flushed with anxiety. "Is everything all right here? Emma, you're needed in the kitchen." "Everything is perfect," the dark-eyed man said, though he never looked away from me. "In fact, I'd like Emma to handle our table exclusively this evening." "Of course, Mr. Dante, whatever you need." Marco practically bowed, then grabbed my arm hard enough to leave marks, dragging me back toward the kitchen. "Do you have any idea who that is?" he hissed once we were out of earshot. "That's Alejandro Dante. The Alessandro Dante." The name meant nothing to me, and my confusion must have shown. "Jesus, Emma, do you live under a rock?" Marco rubbed his face. "The Dante family basically owns half the city, and not the legal half. You do not stare at Alejandro Dante. You do not talk back to Alejandro Dante. You serve him. You say yes, sir. And you disappear. Understand?" My stomach dropped. Mafia. He was talking about the Mafia. "I didn't know," I whispered. "Well, now you do. And for some reason, he wants you serving his table. So, put on your best smile, keep your mouth shut, and pray you make it through the night without offending him." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of anxiety and hyper-awareness. Every time I approached table 12, my heart hammered against my ribs. "Alessandro, Mr. Dante," I reminded myself. "Watch me with those dark, unreadable eyes." Not obviously, not crudely, but I felt his gaze like a physical touch every time I came near. His men talked in low voices about things I tried not to hear. Shipments, territories, names that came with implied threats. I refilled wine glasses, cleared plates, and tried to be invisible, but I wasn't invisible to him. "You're nervous," he observed when I brought their dessert course. The restaurant had emptied considerably, but his party showed no signs of leaving. "I'm fine." I lied. "Your hands are shaking." I glanced down. He was right. I set down the dessert plates carefully, willing my hands to steady. "Someone told you who I am," he continued, his voice conversational, but his eyes sharp. "Now you're afraid." It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway. "Are you scared of me, Emma?" The question hung in the air between us. His men had stopped talking. All attention suddenly focused on our exchange. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. I should have said yes. Should have played it safe, shown appropriate fear, given him the answer he probably expected. Instead, I met his gaze directly. Should I be? The silence that followed felt like falling, like stepping off a cliff and waiting to see if there was water or rocks below. Then Alessandro Dante laughed. Not loud, not mocking, but genuine, like I'd surprised him for the second time that night. "Luca," he said, still looking at me. "What do you think? Should she be scared of me?" Luca, the dangerous one who'd almost threatened me earlier, shifted in his seat. "Boss, It was a rhetorical question. Alejandro's voice remained pleasant, but something in it made Luca's mouth snap shut. Alejandro stood, and I realized he was taller than I'd thought, at least 6 feet 2 inches, with a presence that seemed to fill the entire space. He reached into his jacket. I tried not to flinch, and pulled out a business card. "You're interesting, Emma Walsh," he said, pressing the card into my palm. His fingers were warm, and the brief contact sent electricity at my arm. "I think we'll see each other again." "I work here most nights," I said stupidly. "I know." His smile was dangerous and beautiful. "But I think our next meeting will be somewhere more private." Before I could respond, he was moving toward the exit, his men falling into formation around him like a well-rehearsed dance. 2 men emerged from the shadows near the door, the ones I'd noticed earlier, and preceded him outside. Through the window, I watched him slide into the back of a black SUV with tinted windows. Another identical SUV pulled out in front, and a third fell in behind. Marco appeared at my shoulder. "What did he give you?" I looked down at the card. Heavy stock, black with silver lettering, just a phone number. No name, no title. "Nothing important," I said, slipping it into my apron pocket. But my fingers kept finding it throughout the rest of my shift, tracing the embossed numbers like a talisman, or a warning, I should have thrown it away. I should have forgotten about dark eyes and dangerous smiles. I should have known that Alejandro Dante didn't do anything without a reason, and his interest in me wasn't the kind of attention anyone wanted. But when I got home that night to my tiny studio apartment with its peeling wallpaper and broken heating, when I finally collapsed onto my secondhand couch and pulled out that black card, I didn't throw it away, I saved it. And somewhere across the city in a penthouse I'd never seen, I had the strange, impossible feeling that Alejandro Dante knew I would. The rain continued to fall, washing the city clean of its daily sins, but some stains, I was beginning to learn, ran too deep to ever wash away. 3 days passed before I heard from him again. 3 days of jumping every time the restaurant door opened, of checking my phone obsessively, even though I'd never given him my number, of lying awake at night, replaying that conversation in my head. Should I be scared of me? What kind of person asks that? What kind of person answers the way I did? I'd researched him, of course, late at night, curled up in bed with my laptop casting blue light across my face. I'd typed his name into search engines and fallen down a rabbit hole I couldn't climb out of. Alejandro Dante, 32 years old, head of the Dante family operations in the city. His father had died 5 years ago. Car accident, the article said, though the way they said it made it clear nobody believed that. Since taking over, Alessandro had consolidated power, eliminated rivals, and turned the family business into something sleeker, more sophisticated, and infinitely more dangerous. There were photos. Him at charity galas in $1,000 tuxedos, him leaving courthouses where charges somehow never stuck, him at his father's funeral, face carved from stone, surrounded by men who looked ready to kill on his command. I should have been terrified. Instead, I couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd looked at me, like I was a puzzle he wanted to solve. On the 4th day, everything changed. I was walking home from my shift, exhausted and aching, when I noticed the car, black SUV with tinted windows, idling at the corner near my apartment building. The same kind of vehicle that had waited for Alejandro outside the restaurant. My heart kicked into overdrive. I tried to tell myself it was paranoia, that black SUVs were common in the city, that I was being ridiculous. Then the back door opened. Miss Walsh. The man who stepped out was built like a freight train, all shoulders and controlled violence. I recognized him from Alejandro's table. One of the quiet ones who'd watched everything and said nothing. Mr. Dante requests your presence.
I'm sorry.
What? It's not a complicated request. His voice was polite, but left no room for argument. Please get in the car.
And if I don't want to?
He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Mr. Dante was very specific. He said you might be difficult. He said to tell you that you have a choice. You always have a choice. The way he emphasized the word made it clear that while I technically had a choice, only one option was wise. I thought about running, about screaming, about all the things a smart woman should do when a mobster's enforcer tells her to get in an unmarked vehicle, but I also thought about Alejandro's eyes, about the way he'd laughed when I challenged him, about the strange pull I'd felt, like gravity shifting beneath my feet. Where are we going? I asked. Mr. Dante will explain. I got in the car. The interior smelled of leather and expensive cologne. Another man sat in the driver's seat, and I recognized the back of his head. Luca, the dangerous one. He glanced at me in the rearview mirror, his expression unreadable. We drove in silence through streets that grew progressively more affluent. The buildings got taller, the cars got shinier, and my anxiety ratcheted higher with every block. I tried to memorize the route, some survival instinct kicking in, but after the 7th or 8th turn, I lost track. Finally, we pulled up to a high-rise that looked like it had been carved from glass and steel and money, the kind of building that had doormen in uniforms and security cameras that actually worked. This way, the freight train said, opening my door. The lobby was all marble and modern art, the kind of sterile elegance that made me acutely aware of my cheap clothes and scuffed shoes. We bypassed the main elevators, heading instead to a private one in the back that required a key card. We rode up in silence. The numbers climbed. 20, 30, 40, until finally stopping at the top floor, the penthouse level. The doors opened directly into an apartment that defied my understanding of the Word, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the entire city. Twinkling lights spread out like stars fallen to earth. The furniture was modern and minimal. All clean lines and expensive materials. Original artwork hung on the walls. I recognized a piece that should have been in a museum, and standing by the windows, backlit by the city he apparently owned, was Alejandro Dante. He'd removed his jacket and tie, his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar. Somehow this version of him was more dangerous than the suited one from the restaurant. More human, more real. Emma. He turned, and even across the distance of the massive room, I felt the impact of his gaze. Thank you for coming. Did I have a choice? The words came out sharper than I intended, his lips quirked. You always have a choice. You chose to get in the car. You chose not to run. You're still choosing even now. Why am I here? Because I want you here. He moved closer, each step deliberate. Because I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since you walked away from my table with your hands shaking, but your eyes steady. Do you know how rare that is? Fear and courage in the same heartbeat. You don't know anything about me. I know more than you think. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something dark and woodsy with hints of bergamot. Emma Catherine Walsh, 24 years old, studied art history at the university until your father got sick. Lung cancer. He died 8 months ago, leaving you with $60,000 in medical debt and a degree you can't afford to finish. You work 60-hour weeks at the Velvet Rose, sending every spare penny to debt collectors who don't care that you're drowning. My breath caught in my throat. How? I make it my business to know things. His voice was matter-of-fact, not apologetic. Especially about people who interest me. That's creepy. Yes, he agreed simply. It is, but I'm not a good man, Emma. I thought I made that clear. Then why am I here? What do you want from me? He studied me for a long moment, something complex moving behind his dark eyes. I want to offer you a deal. What kind of deal? Your debt. All of it. $60,000 gone. Plus a monthly allowance that would let you quit the restaurant, finish your degree if you want, live somewhere without mold growing on the bathroom ceiling. My heart hammered. It sounded too good to be true, which meant it was. In exchange for what? Your company? I blinked. My company. I want you available when I need you. Dinners, events, occasionally traveling with me. You'll be compensated generously for your time. He paused, his gaze intense. Nothing you don't agree to. I'm not asking you to sleep with me, if that's what you're thinking. Though I won't pretend I'm not attracted to you. This is insane. You're basically asking me to be what? Your escort. I'm asking you to be yourself, just near me. He moved closer still, and I could feel the heat radiating from his body. I'm a man who gets what he wants, Emma. Always. But I want you to choose this. I want you to walk into it with your eyes open. And if I say no... His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Then Luca drives you home, and we never speak of this again. You go back to your life, your debt, your 60-hour weeks. I go back to mine. We become strangers who shared one interesting evening. He made it sound so simple, so easy, but nothing about Alessandro Dante was simple or easy. I need time to think. Of course. He pulled out his phone, typed something quickly. I've transferred $5,000 to your bank account. Consider it a gesture of good faith.
Take a week.
Think about what you want, what you need. Then call me. I can accept. You can, and you will because you're practical, Emma. It's one of the things I admire about you. You know that pride is a luxury you can't afford right now. He was right, and I hated him for it. 1 week, I said quietly. 1 week. He smiled, and it transformed his face into something almost boyish, almost innocent. Luca will drive you home. And, Emma, make sure you eat something. You're too thin. The ride home passed in a daze. When I finally stumbled into my apartment, I checked my bank account with shaking hands. $5,000, just sitting there like it was nothing, like it hadn't taken me 6 months of brutal work to save a tenth of that amount. I should have been grateful, should have been relieved. Instead, I felt like I just sold something I couldn't get back, That night, I dreamed of dark eyes and dangerous promises, of gilded cages that looked like freedom, of falling and falling with no idea where I'd land. The next 3 days were torture. I went through the motions at work, but my mind was elsewhere, constantly circling back to Alejandro's offer. $60,000. My debt gone. A chance to breathe, to live, to be something other than exhausted and afraid. But at what cost? I researched more, found articles about women who'd been linked to the Dante family over the years. Some had ended up wealthy and protected. Others had simply disappeared from public view. The internet was full of whispers and speculation, but nothing concrete. Nothing that told me what I actually needed to know. On the 5th day, something happened that made my decision for me that I was leaving. The restaurant late, past midnight, the streets mostly empty. I'd stayed to help clean up after a private party, desperate for the overtime pay. The rain had returned, turning the sidewalks slick and treacherous. I didn't notice the men following me until it was too late. There were 3 of them, spread out but clearly together. One crossed the street to block my path forward. Another appeared from an alley behind me. The third stayed to my left, cutting off that escape route. Emma Walsh. The one in front was tall and wiry with a smile that made my skin crawl. "I don't know you." My voice came out steadier than I felt. "But we know you. Heard you've been keeping interesting company lately. The Dante boy seems pretty taken with you." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't be stupid." He stepped closer, and I smelled alcohol and something rotten. "You're going to give him a message for us. Tell Alessandro that the Moretti family sends their regards. Tell him we know all his weaknesses now, including his pretty little waitress." Terror shot through me cold and sharp. We're not, save it." His hand shot out, grabbing my arm hard enough to make me gasp. "You think he does background checks and drops $5,000 on girls he's not interested in? You're either incredibly stupid or incredibly naive." "How did he know about the money?" The man behind me moved closer. I could feel the walls closing in, the night pressing down. This was it. This was how people disappeared in this city. Then headlights flooded the street. 2 black SUVs came out of nowhere, moving fast. They screeched to a halt, surrounding us. Doors flew open, and suddenly there were men everywhere. Alessandro's men, I realized, recognizing Luca and the freight train, whose name I still didn't know. The Moretti men released me immediately, backing away with their hands raised. "Gentlemen." Luca's voice was pleasant, conversational. "I think you made a wrong turn. We were just talking. You were threatening Mr. Dante's property." Luca smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen. "That's not talking. That's a declaration of war. We didn't touch her. You put your hands on her." This voice came from behind me, deep and cold and absolutely furious. I turned. Alejandro stood there, and he looked nothing like the controlled, sophisticated man from the penthouse. His eyes were black with rage, his jaw tight, every line of his body radiating lethal intent. He moved past me, each step precise, until he was inches from the wiry man who'd grabbed my arm. "You touched her," Alessandro repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "You put your hands on what's mine." "She's not." Alessandro moved so fast, I barely saw it. 1 moment he was still. The next the wiry man was on his knees, crying out in pain as Alessandro twisted his arm behind his back. "Say it," Alessandro demanded. "Say she's mine. She's yours." The man's voice cracked with pain and fear. "Jesus Christ, she's yours." Alessandro released him, stepping back. His men immediately grabbed all 3 Moretti soldiers, dragging them toward one of the SUVs. Then Alessandro turned to me, and just like that the rage was gone, replaced by something else. Concern, possessiveness, something that looked almost like fear. "Are you hurt?" His hands were on my shoulders, my arms, checking for injuries with a gentleness that contradicted everything I'd just witnessed. "I'm fine," I managed. "I'm okay." "You're not okay. You're shaking." He shrugged out of his jacket, draping it over my shoulders. It smelled like him, and the weight of it felt like safety. "Luca, take the Moretti trash. Somewhere they'll remember this lesson. Make it memorable." "With pleasure, boss." The SUVs drove away, leaving just one vehicle and two of Alejandro's men standing at a discreet distance. "How did you know?" I asked, my voice small. "How did you know I was in trouble?" His jaw tightened. "You've had protection since the night we met. Did you really think I'd let you walk around unguarded after making your connection to me so public? You've been having me followed. I've been keeping you safe." He cupped my face in his hands, forcing me to meet his eyes, and tonight proved I was right to do it. The Morettas are our rivals. They'd hurt you just to get to me. Do you understand now? Do you see what being in my world means? I should have been angry about the surveillance, should have been terrified by what I just witnessed, should have run as far and fast as I could, but all I could think about was the way he'd said it. "What's mine?" "I'll take your deal," I whispered, his eyes widened slightly. "Emma, I'll take it. All of it. Whatever you want. I took a shaky breath. "Just keep me safe, please." Something fierce and possessive flashed across his face. Then he pulled me against his chest, wrapping his arms around me like he could shield me from the entire world. "Always," he murmured into my hair. "You're mine now, Emma, and I protect what's mine always." Standing there in the rain, wrapped in the arms of a monster who just proved he'd go to war for me, I realized I'd just made a deal with the devil, and the terrifying part was how right it felt. Alejandro's penthouse became my gilded cage within 48 hours, not literally. He was careful to remind me I could leave whenever I wanted, but the apartment he'd arranged for me was in the same building, just 3 floors down for convenience. He'd said, though we both knew it was about control, about keeping me close, about making sure nothing like that night on the street could ever happen again. The new apartment was obscene in its luxury. Hardwood floors that gleamed like honey, floor-to-ceiling windows with views that made my breath catch, furniture that looked like it belonged in magazines. The bathroom alone was bigger than my entire previous studio, all marble and chrome with a shower that had more settings than my My old landlord had been confused when Alejandro's men showed up to collect my things. I'd left him a check for the remaining months on my lease, money I now had, thanks to the account Alejandro had set up for me. The debt collectors had been even more confused when every single one of my accounts was paid in full within 24 hours. $60, 000 gone. Just like that, I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt owned. "You're thinking too loud." Alejandro's voice pulled me from my thoughts. We were in his penthouse, our third dinner together in as many days. He'd insisted on these evening meetings, claiming he wanted to get to know me properly. So far, that had meant expensive wine, food I couldn't pronounce, and conversations that felt like chess matches where I didn't know the rules. "I'm just adjusting," I said, pushing my barely touched risotto around the plate. He leaned back in his chair, studying me with that intense gaze that made me feel transparent. He'd changed after work, another perfectly tailored shirt, this one charcoal gray, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that were surprisingly muscular. There was a small scar on his left wrist that I'd noticed during our first dinner. I'd wanted to ask about it, but hadn't found the courage. "You're not eating." "I'm not very hungry." "You're never hungry. I'm beginning to think you don't actually need food to survive." His tone was light, but there was an edge of genuine concern underneath. "When was the last time you had a full meal?" "I eat," I protested weakly. "Coffee and anxiety don't count as meals, Emma." He stood, moving to the kitchen with fluid grace. I watched as he pulled out ingredients, his movements efficient and practiced. "My mother insisted all her sons learn to cook. She said a man who couldn't feed himself was useless." "You have brothers too." "Marco runs our operations in Chicago. Luca, you've met him, handles enforcement here." He began chopping vegetables with professional precision. "My mother died when I was 17. Cancer like your father." The unexpected vulnerability in his voice made my chest tighten. "I'm sorry."
Don't be.
It was a long time ago, but the way his knife moved faster, harder, told a different story. "She would have liked you. I think she had no patience for weak people. But she respected those who stood their ground even when they were afraid." "Is that what I am? Afraid?" He looked up, meeting my eyes. "Terrified." But you're here anyway. That takes courage or stupidity. Sometimes they're the same thing. He smiled, and it softened the harsh lines of his face.
Come here.
Help me with this. I stood on uncertain legs, moving to the kitchen. He handed me a tomato and a knife, positioning me at the counter beside him. His sleeve brushed against my arm, and I tried to ignore the spark of electricity that contact created. Tell me about your father, he said as we worked. What was he like? The question caught me off guard. Why do you want to know? Because he shaped you, and I want to understand you. I focused on the tomato, watching my hands slice through the red flesh. He was kind, too kind maybe. He worked as a school teacher. History, never made much money, but he loved what he did. When he got sick, he tried to hide it from me. Kept going to work even when he could barely breathe. By the time he finally went to the doctor, it was stage 4. And you dropped out to take care of him.
Of course I did.
He was my father. I blinked back tears that had no business being there. He died 3 days after my 24th birthday. His last words were an apology for the debt he was leaving me. Alessandro's hand covered mine, stilling the knife. That's why you took my deal. Not just for the money for him, because he taught you that love means sacrifice. Don't psychoanalyze me. I'm not. I'm understanding you. He turned me to face him, his hands warm on my shoulders. Your father sounds like he was a good man. The kind of man who would probably hate me. Probably, I agreed. But he'd understand why you're here. He'd forgive you for doing what you had to do to survive. Would he? My voice cracked slightly. I'm not so sure. Alessandro pulled me closer and I let him, too tired and overwhelmed to resist. His chest was solid against my cheek, his heartbeat steady and strong. You're stronger than you think, Emma. Stronger than most people I know. I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm drowning. Then let me be your oxygen. His arms tightened around me, possessive and protective. That's why you're here, remember? I protect what's mine. There was that word again. Mind, it should have made me angry, should have made me pull away. Instead, I found myself sinking deeper into his embrace, letting him hold me together when I felt like falling apart. We stood like that for a long moment, the city lights twinkling beyond the windows, the smell of cooking food filling the air. It felt almost normal, almost like this was a real relationship and not a transaction almost. The next week passed in a strange rhythm. Alessandro had business during the days. Business he never discussed in detail, though I'd learned to recognize the signs, the tense phone calls, the meetings with men who looked like they ate nails for breakfast, the nights when he came home with blood on his knuckles and wouldn't meet my eyes. But the evenings were ours. He took me to a gallery opening on Wednesday, his hand possessive on the small of my back as we moved through crowds of wealthy art enthusiasts. I'd worn a dress he'd had delivered to my apartment, black silk that cost more than 3 months of my old rent. People stared at us, whispered behind their champagne flutes. I heard my name paired with his in speculation that made my cheeks burn. Ignore them, Alessandro murmured in my ear, his breath warm against my skin. They're jealous. The women want to be you. The men want to be me. Egotistical much. Realistic. His hand slid lower, just above the curve of my hip, a claiming gesture that everyone in the room noticed. You're beautiful, Emma. Surely you realize that. I'm average. You're extraordinary. His voice was low, intense. You look at art the way most people look at lovers, like you want to consume it, become part of it. He wasn't wrong. Standing in front of a Rothko that probably cost millions, I felt that familiar hunger, the desire to understand, to connect, to lose myself in color and form and meaning. This is what you should be doing, Alessandro said, standing behind me now, his presence a solid warmth at my back, not serving food to people who don't see you. You should be here surrounded by beauty, creating it or studying it or preserving it. That's not realistic. Why not? Money isn't an obstacle anymore. Finish your degree. I'll make sure you get into the best graduate programs. You could work at any gallery or museum in the city. I turned to look at him, searching his face for the catch. Why would you do that? Because I want you happy. He said it like it was simple, like his wants rewrote the laws of reality. And because talented people should be able to pursue their talents, it's wasteful otherwise. Alejandro, don't argue with me on this. It's already done. I spoke with the university. You're reinstated for the spring semester. Full scholarship, my foundation's name on it, so there's no connection to me personally if that makes you more comfortable. Shock stole my breath. You can't just. I can. I did. Classes start in 2 weeks. His hand cupped my cheek, thumb stroking my jawline. Say thank you, Emma. This is insane.
Say it.
Thank you, I whispered, hating how easily he dismantled my resistance, how he seemed to know exactly what I needed before I did. He smiled, satisfied, and pressed a kiss to my forehead, a chaste gesture that somehow felt more intimate than anything else we'd shared. Around us, the whispers grew louder. Friday night, everything shifted again. We were having dinner. Actually, in a restaurant this time, though not the Velvet Rose. Alejandro had wanted somewhere less public, which apparently meant a private room in an establishment that probably didn't have its name on any official records. Luca was there along with 2 other men I'd learned were part of Alessandro's inner circle. Marco, his younger brother, had flown in from Chicago and sat across from me, studying me with calculating eyes that reminded me of Alessandro. So, you're the one who's got my brother acting like a lovesick teenager, Marco said, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. Marco. Alejandro's tone held a warning.
What?
I'm just making conversation. Marco grinned, but there was steel underneath. It's not every day Alessandro brings a woman into the family business. I'm not in the family business, I said quickly. You're in his penthouse. You're at this dinner. You're wearing a dress that cost more than most people's cars, and you've got protection details that even our high-value assets don't get. Marco leaned forward. You're in the business, sweetheart, whether you want to admit it or not. Alessandro's hand slammed down on the table, making the glasses jump. Enough. The temperature in the room plummeted. Marco raised his hands in surrender, but his smirk remained. I apologize, Alessandro said to me, his voice tight. My brother forgets his manners sometimes. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking, Marco countered. The Morettis already made a move on her. The other families are watching. You need to make your intentions clear, or she becomes a target. My intentions are perfectly clear. Are they? Marco's eyes flicked between us. Because from where I'm sitting, you've got a girl you're obsessed with but won't claim publicly. That looks like weakness, brother. And weakness gets people killed. The air felt too thick to breathe. I could see Alejandro's jaw working, muscles twitching under his skin. Emma. He turned to me, and something in his expression made my heart skip. I need to ask you something, and I need you to think very carefully before you answer. Okay. The Morettis won't be the last to see you as a vulnerability. As long as you're connected to me, you're in danger. I can protect you. I will protect you. But there are levels of protection, different commitments. He paused, and I swear I saw his hand tremble slightly before he studied it. I'm asking if you're willing to go deeper, to let me claim you publicly and permanently, to become untouchable. What does that mean exactly? Marco laughed. He's asking you to be his sweetheart, his woman, his everything. In our world, that's a vow. Break it and nothing. Alejandro cut him off sharply, because Emma isn't going to break anything. And neither am I. His eyes never left mine. I'm saying I want more than our arrangement. I want you, Emma. All of you. Not as a transaction, but as mine. Really mine. The room fell silent. Every man at the table watched us, waiting. My mind raced. This was happening too fast. We'd known each other less than 2 weeks. This wasn't real. IT couldn't be real. IT was obsession, possession, the dangerous infatuation of a man who is used to owning things. But when I looked into Alejandro's eyes, I saw something that terrified me more than anything else. I saw certainty. I saw devotion. I saw a man who'd decided I was his and who'd move heaven and earth to keep me. What if I say no? I whispered. Pain flashed across his face, quickly hidden. Then I honor our original agreement. You keep the apartment, the money, everything I promised. You finish your degree, you walk away, and I make sure no one in my world ever touches you. You'd let me go. I'd have no choice. His voice was raw. I told you, Emma.
You always have a choice.
I want you to choose me, but I won't force you. Marco muttered something in Italian that I didn't understand. Luca shifted uncomfortably. The other men looked anywhere but at us. I thought about my father, about the sacrifices he'd made, the love he'd shown, about how he'd taught me that sometimes the bravest thing you could do is take a leap of faith. I thought about Alejandro's hands on me, gentle despite their capacity for violence. About the way he looked at me like I was precious, about how safe I felt when he held me, even though he was probably the most dangerous person I'd ever met. I thought about the girl I'd been 3 weeks ago, drowning in debt, invisible to the world, slowly disappearing under the weight of her own exhaustion, and I thought about who I might become if I took his hand and jumped. Okay, I said quietly. Alejandro's eyes widened. Okay, I'm yours. Really yours. I took a shaky breath. But Alejandro, if I'm doing this, if I'm jumping into your world, then you have to promise me something. Anything. Don't make me regret it. Don't make me regret trusting you. He stood, moving around the table so fast I barely had time to process. Then he was pulling me up, his hands framing my face, his eyes burning with an intensity that stole my breath. Never, he swore. I swear on my mother's grave, Emma. I will never make you regret choosing me. Then he kissed me. Not gentle, not tentative, a claiming kiss, possessive and deep, his hands sliding into my hair as he pulled me against him. I felt his heart hammering against my chest, matching the frantic rhythm of my own. When he finally pulled back, we were both breathing hard. Mine, he whispered against my lips. Yours, I agreed, and sealed my fate.